Have you ever come face to face with a problem so big and so daunting that you were overwhelmed and drained? I mean, you were hopeless. You were stress paralyzed. It could be perhaps maybe going through bankruptcy. Maybe it's going through a divorce. Maybe it's a phone call from the doctor saying it's a chronic diagnosis. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's the loss of your faith. If you're feeling overwhelmed and discouraged, I want you to know that this message is for you. If you're wrestling with the anger and the angst of the world that's gone out of control, today I want you to know we are here to sit with you, to share that burden, and to seek peace. The world is a crazy place, and it's kind of been that way for a long time. In our text this morning, we'll see that the people of God are discouraged. They are overwhelmed to the point of grief. They are being oppressed. Their food is taken away from them. They're hiding what supplies they have so the enemy doesn't come and steal them. There is no king to stand and to wage war against these nations. These people are trying to do what is right in their own eyes, and guess what's happening? Justice is being thwarted. Hope is being lost. Discouragement is reigning for the people of God, and they don't know what to do. That's where we find ourselves in Judges chapter 6 today. Because what I want us to do is I don't want us to focus on all the problems of the world. I want to hear what God has to say about how we can become overcomers. Because God has gifted us His word so that when trials in our life, when things come to steal our joy, when things come to beat us down, when the enemy wants to take away that courage from our hearts, that we can become overcomers, and that God will lead us to His peace and to His justice and to have reign in His kingdom. So let's start here in Judges chapter 6, and let's see how bad the children of Israel have it. So in Judges chapter 6, just listen, see what's going on. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them to the hand of Midian 7 years. The hand of Midian prevailed over Israel, and because of Midian, the Israelites provided for themselves hiding places in the mountains, in caves, and strongholds. For whenever the Israelites put in seed, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the land as far as the neighborhood of Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep, nor ox, nor donkey. For they and their livestock would come up, and they would even bring their tents as thick as locusts. Neither would they nor their camels could be counted, so they wasted the land they came in. And so Israel was greatly impoverished because of Midian. And the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. What we have here in Judges chapter 6 is a time during this horrible oppression. You have the land of Midian coming in and literally taking over Israel's stuff. They can't plant seeds without the Midianites coming and eating their food. They can't have livestock out there before the Midianites come and they capture their livestock. There's so many of them. They're outnumbered. You can't even count how many people there are. You can't even count how many camels there are. It's as if the writer of Judges says, it's as if locusts have come and just cleared off the land. Imagine living in a time of scarcity where you didn't know where your next meal was going to be. You didn't know how you were going to take care of your children, whether or not they were going to have bread, because you were hiding out in the caves or in the mountaintops, to hiding from the enemies of the people of God. Talk about uncertainty, talking about sheltering in place. These people knew what it was to struggle. For 7 years, they struggled against the Midianites. I want you to know this morning that if you're going through a struggle, if you are stuck on survive, if you are like hiding out in a cave with your faith, just saying, Lord, I'm just trying to make ends meet, that there's hope for you, that you're not alone. Many of us may feel cut off from each other during this time of quarantine and sheltering in place. Some of you I know are feeling that, Lord, what's going on? And you might be crying out to the Lord, will you please send this pestilence away so that we can come back together and live life like we should have? Some of us are looking at ourselves and thinking, Lord, what have I done to cause this? We see in Judges that the people of God had left the relationship with Him, and they tried themselves to be happy. They thought that if they were in control, if they could just have things their way, that everything would be okay. And so God allows these enemies to come in and to give them a hard time. And the people became unraveled because they realized that it was not God that caused the trouble, that they brought the trouble upon themselves because they had forgotten to take God along with them in their lives. Church, I'm not saying that everything that bad that happens to you is because you were unfaithful to God. I don't want you to misunderstand me. I want you to know that we live in a fallen world and bad things happen to good people. But it's in those moments of weakness, it's in those moments of scarcity, it's in those moments that we get the privilege to rely not upon our own strength. Because we cannot overcome these situations in and of our own strength. We must rely on the God who created the heavens and the earth with His breath. We have Him on our side as long as we make His will our will. So let's see what happens in this horrible situation that the people of God find themselves in. What happens in Judges 6? Is there good news? I'm looking for good news. I'm tired of all the bad news going on in the world. I'm looking for some good news. And let's see if Judges 6 has good news for us today. When the Israelites cried to the Lord on the account of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet. And he said, "Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt. I brought you out of the house of slavery, and I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I say to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not pay reverence to the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live, but you have not heeded my voice." God is saying, I have always been here. I have always been the one who's delivered you. I have allowed you to overcome every obstacle in your past. You left me. You broke our relationship. But I'm here with you now. And I am willing to help you out of this situation. I hope that during this time of crisis and when the world is going out of control, I pray that maybe we refocus our hearts on God again. I pray that we turn to Him and say, Lord, it's not within a political party. It's not within the marketplace. It's within Jesus that we can find the power to overcome, because he has already overcome sin and death for you and for me. And he has promised that if we will follow him, he will let us overcome with him. Can I get an amen to that? What we see here is very powerful. We see God calling to his people saying, I have never left you. I have always been there to redeem you. And he is here now saying, I am here with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. And so I love what happens next in Judges chapter 6. We are introduced to the man of Gideon. Gideon, man, when I think about Bible studies and I think about all the characters in the Bible who had this faith that was so great, I think of David. I think of all of these, Moses, Abraham. Gideon is one that I can relate to, because Gideon, well, let's just face it. Gideon's just looking out for number one, and he's a little concerned. He's a little afraid of all the bad things that's going on, and he doesn't really know what to do. He is paralyzed by stress. So what we do is we see that God comes to Gideon. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and to his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. So I want you to see this. God finds Gideon. Gideon doesn't go up on the mountaintop looking for God. That God, in his infinite wisdom, God comes down and finds Gideon. He's hiding out, trying to thresh wheat. He's trying to preserve some food. Notice that God comes to Gideon in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of distress. Gideon's hiding out so nobody can find him, and yet God comes to him in that moment and says, you can't hide from me. I'm willing to come down and be with you in the middle of the chaos and the mess of life. I love that. That's the way God is. He's willing to meet us in the middle of the muck and the yuck of our lives. Jesus himself became flesh and came as a man, didn't arrive in palaces. He arrived to a blue-collar worker and a young bride, and is born in a stable. God is willing to meet humanity in the chaotic, dirty places to let us know that he is with us. So here's Gideon. And so the angel of the Lord said, the Lord is with you, you mighty warrior. And I love Gideon's response in verse 13. It says, Gideon answered him, but sir, if the Lord is with us, then why has all of this happened to us? And were all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has cast us off and given us into the hand of Midian. Man, isn't Gideon just real? I mean, this takes some audacity to tell this angel of the Lord, saying, well, sure, if God's with us, then where is he? It's like he's abandoned us. If we're his people, then why is he not doing what he did a long time ago? Do you ever feel like Gideon? Do you ever find yourself asking these questions? Lord, if I'm following you, then why are these bad things happening to me? Why is my family dealing with this health crisis right now? If you're good and you're the healer, why is this happening? Maybe you're asking yourself the question, well, if God is good, then why is it that there's so much injustice in the world? And we get angry about how this world is full of injustice. I think we're right to be angry. Gideon brings his questions, these hard-hitting questions. He brings his hopelessness. He brings his discouragement, and he brings it to the messenger of God. And the Lord doesn't smite him. Do you recognize that the Lord can handle your concerns? The Lord is big enough to handle your complaints. The Lord is big enough to handle your wrestling with your faith. And in the midst of Gideon's questions, God is there. He is present. He doesn't forsake Gideon. He doesn't smite Gideon. He gives Gideon a job to do. What you see next, I think, is really cool. But the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this your might. Deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. I send you." I love how God gives complainers work to do. He says, all right, you have a passion. You have a concern about your people. You recognize that there's injustice going on. And God says, okay, so what are you doing about it, Gideon? Why are you hiding in fear? Why are you backing away from the conflict? I am sending you as my messenger. And I love his reply. Verse 15 of Judges 6, he says, "But sir, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." What God is calling Gideon to recognize that it's not about Gideon. It's not because he's from the biggest tribe. It's not because he's from the biggest family. It's not because he's the biggest one in the family. He's wanting Gideon to recognize that it's about God. That God will allow Gideon to overcome the enemies that are plaguing the people of God. The Lord said to him, "But I will be with you." I want you to know this morning that if you are in the middle of a financial crisis, if you're in the middle of this struggle of health, if you're in the middle of just this wondering, what does this all mean? And you're wrestling with, where is God right now? And you're wanting to overcome these doubts. I want you to know that God has not abandoned you, that God is right there with you in the midst of it. He has not left you. He has not forsaken you. That he is there willing to partner with you to help you overcome whatever obstacle life and the enemy, Satan, is throwing at you. Notice the words of God saying, "I will be with you." And I love this. He says, "And you will strike down the Midianites, every one of them." Gideon doesn't know what to think of this. He's like, these are big bad dudes. I don't know if I can handle it. And so what he does is a really neat thing. He says, all right, now if I found favor with you, show me a sign that it's you who speak with me. Do not depart from here until I come to you, and I'll bring out my present and stay until you return. So what I think is fantastic here is Gideon. He's threshing wheat. This angel of the Lord comes and says, I'm with you, Gideon. You are a mighty man. Go and deliver. Go deliver my people. And what happens next is Gideon is like, I'm not the guy. You've got the wrong guy. I'm little. I can't overcome. But he has the wisdom to say, okay, something's going on here. And what he does is he offers hospitality. In a time of scarcity, in a time of not really knowing where the next meal is coming from, Gideon is willing to offer up food to this stranger. And notice what it says, and he cooks for him. And this is not just like, running off at Del Taco and grabbing a couple of little tacos and saying, here, eat this. Gideon, he puts on the Ritz. He prepares a goat and unleavened bread and he makes a broth, and he cooks it all, and he brings it out to the messenger of God. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and put them on the rock and pour out the broth." And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of the staff which was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. God takes Gideon's gift of what he has. I can't deliver you, but I can make you a meal, Lord. I can be hospitable to strangers. And God takes that, what Gideon is willing to give, and he makes it a burnt offering. Now, I know a lot of my cooking becomes burnt offering, but God's not eating that, I'm telling you. But what happens here is Gideon, verse 22, a light comes on and says, "Then Gideon perceived that it was the angel of the Lord and said, 'Help me, Lord, for I've seen the Lord face to face.' But the Lord said to him, 'Peace be to you. Do not fear, you shall not die.' Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, 'The Lord is,'" notice this, "peace. To this day it stands at Orpha, which belongs to the Abiezrites." I want you to see something that's really powerful. I want you to see how Gideon goes from someone who's questioning and he's focusing on the problems. And yet God comes down and God says, "I will meet you in the midst of your problems. I will help you overcome. But the first thing you need to recognize is that I am God and you are not." And when Gideon understands that God is in control, the first thing he does is worship God. So how does this relate to us? If you want to be an overcomer, if you want to overcome the struggles in your life, the first thing you need to recognize is that God has not left you nor forsaken you, that God is with you in the muck and the yuck of your life. Isn't that an awesome thought? That he wants to help you overcome. And when you recognize that that's what God has got in store for you, that then you can let go and that you can worship him. Take whatever you have and you give it to God, and he will make it glorify himself. There's more to the story of Gideon that we're going to talk about next week, but this is the first part about being overcomers. I want to tell you a story and then we'll end today. In 1979, there was a family that was living in such horrible condition. They lived in East Germany. And so these two families, they came together and said, "We have got to do something to save our families." And so what they did is they took what they had. They took parts of a motorcycle. They took some fabric that they bought. And what they did was just crazy. They took some propane tanks and they said, "What we're going to do is we're going to get out of this communist regime. We're going to go to where there's freedom." Can you imagine? Under the guise at night, creating a contraption that would help liberate your family. Yet in order to set them free, you had to put them at risk. In 1979, two families did just that. They took some parts of an old motorcycle, they took some fabric, they took some propane tanks, and part of the stovepipe in their kitchen. And they built a hot air balloon. And they escaped from East Germany to West Germany. I want you to know that no matter how messed up your life is, that God will give you the tools in your hands, that when you partner with him, you will overcome. It may not be how you expect, but with God on your side, we will overcome the fears of this world with love. We will overcome the hatred of this world with love. We will overcome doubt of this world with love. But you know what, folks? We cannot do that in and of ourselves. We have to rely on God, for God is love. Church, I want you to know that God is right there with you. and that we want to be there with you too. If there's anything that we can do to help you as you're struggling to overcome today, if we can pray for you, we'd love to pray for you. Just send me a message at joe@magcenterchurch.com and we'll pray together. If you want to start your walk of faith with Jesus, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you about what it means to follow Jesus. What does it mean that he overcame death and how he invites us to overcome as well? Church, I pray that this message has been one that's encouraging to you as we go down this story of Gideon to recognize that God is with us and we get to be overcomers with God. Be blessed.